Disclaimer, this show is for educational purposes only and is not an alternative for clinical counseling. Please seek a mental health professional for your specific needs.
Welcome to Intake Talk Show, where it's time to shine the light from a mental health perspective. Today, our topic is trauma. And we are going all the way to Ireland to talk with Mr. Shane Quinn about trauma and how it looks on the other side of the world. But we do know that trauma affects each individual in different ways, but there's also some great correlations with the various traumas that individuals face. So I want you to stay right there because this is a beautiful topic that we're having with Shane. We're going to look at how mental health is treated differently versus the states here in America and Ireland. So sit right there and we're going to start the show now.
Welcome back to Intake Talk Show with your host, Bertha F. Barrett, licensed mental health counselor. Today's guest is Shane Quinn from Waterford, Ireland. The discussion is a deep dive on trauma. Your Intake podcast starts now.
So today our guest is Mr. Shane Quinn. Shane is a licensed psychotherapist working in Waterford, Ireland. I hope I got that right. Waterford,
correct.
Ireland. He was born in Ireland and moved to the USA on a cross-country scholarship in 2011. He lived in the US for 13 years and worked in a variety of different therapeutic environments, such as crisis care, school counseling, and agency work. He moved back to Ireland in December 2024 and has been operating out of his private practice in Waterford since January 2025. Shane specializes in trauma, using a wide array of therapeutic practices to help people navigate their lives and is open to working with most age groups. Welcome to the show, Shane.
Hi, Bertha. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get going on this.
I am too. So is there something a little bit more you'd like to tell our viewers about yourself?
Not too much more. You covered a lot there, I guess. I think it'll be an interesting discussion. I'm a dual citizen as well, so I've US citizenship too.
Nice.
So I think obviously the majority of your audience might be American as well. So I think, we'd have an interesting discussion about all things Irish and US mental health. Maybe it'll be interesting.
I love it. Okay. So let's start the show off with helping viewers understanding what trauma is really. And, because some people really think trauma has to be this gigantic event that occurs, right? And sometimes it can stem from subtle experience, those little small experiences that we often overlook, okay? Can you help viewers understand, from your words, what trauma really is?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think for a little while, everybody understands the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and that's what we associate with trauma. But I think after, if you look at kind of the literature and the research around trauma, what a lot of people found, and I think this is if you're a trauma specialist or a trauma therapist of any kind today, the emergence of complex PTSD has been an interesting topic of discussion. Right, and CPTSD is the acronym.
Right.
And so you're kind of asking, is it specifically one event, or can it be a lot of subtle experiences? It can be both, right? I think I'm a trauma-informed therapist. I work a lot with people on navigating trauma and navigating the world post-trauma. And sometimes there's a clear-cut issue that causes one specific kind of traumatic reaction. For example, God forbid somebody gets into a car accident and then they have an issue getting behind the wheel again, right? And it's like that is one very easy to understand reaction that could be extremely debilitating for that person, right? Getting behind the wheel could be really traumatic and they have to work to get over that. Complex PTSD comes about from a lot of subtle experiences sometimes, right? Like, and repeated exposure to these kind of negative experiences throughout usually childhood, right? Or teenage years, maybe young adult years, right? These are repeated things that can occur that ingrain in us in a very specific way that affects how we perceive, behave, and think about the world in adult life too.
Right.
So they're two different, they're kind of similar, you know, PTSD and complex PTSD, but they affect people in slightly different ways. So long answer to your question being like it is both, right? It just depends on what's happening and what has happened to that individual.
Right. That's I think it's important, for people to understand that because again, often, most people, because I'm a certified clinical trauma professional, most people often aren't aware that they've experienced trauma. Why? Because we have this generalized idea that trauma is something like, rape,
Hmm.
domestic violence, different things like that. But really what it is understanding that trauma is how it matters is not just about what happened, but how the experience affects you, the mind, the body, the relationships, right? So trauma isn't measured only by the size of the event, but the impact of the event. Because for some people, divorce is traumatic.
Incredibly, yeah.
Grief is traumatic, okay? Different things like that. And so people understanding that there are often times, you can experience trauma and not even realize it because you have this impact. You're wondering why you're always anxious, why you're so hypervigilant, why you're often so triggered by something and your emotions are all over the place. And that's because they're not realizing that they experienced something that just hit their nervous system, impacted their nervous system in such a way that it's hard for them to bounce back from it.
Yeah, 100%. And as you know, Bertha, too, like a lot of what we do in trauma care is, you know, helping people understand why they think the way they think and understanding why they do that. And I find that is incredibly powerful to people when they do establish that connection with themselves that they didn't normally do. And somebody listening to this that might not have experienced that level of complex trauma might kind of think, well, wow, I do understand how I think, right? And that's why this is really tough. And
Yeah.
that's why that's why people have a hard time engaging, and not hard in terms of believing it, but actually this can be very difficult for people and it can be very taxing for people because it's very hard to dissect how you think, especially if there's some potentially self-destructive habits in there that have caused you to continue to go back to that maladaptive behavior, right? That's causing you distress. And I think if you're listening to this and you kind of are thinking about people in your life, right? Like you're thinking of, people, we all know someone in our lives that continuously makes really poor decisions,
Yeah.
right? Like really poor. And I'm not just talking about kind of like micro level decisions, like,
Right.
ordering the wrong thing at a restaurant. I'm talking about like being with the wrong partner, right? Like putting themselves in dangerous situations constantly when they've been constantly shown evidence that this is not good, that they keep going back to these people, right? And you're kind of, a lot of people are left scratching their head going like, why do they keep doing this? Do they hate themselves? Are they getting back at a parent or something, right? Like I've heard that just being said before. And it's what's really happening there is like this person has learned through a series of very complex ways to manage their world, to think maladaptively and to think in a very like kind of self-destructive way. And that is just the normal way of thinking for that person. The same way me and you might normally think, okay, what time am I going to work tomorrow? What do I have to do before then? What am I doing afterwards? They're thinking that's normal. That's normal thinking for most people, right? But for these people that suffer with complex PTSD, they're thinking along. They integrate these kind of destructive thinking patterns into their normal thinking,
Right.
and that's a very hard habit to shake unless you get help, unless you're working with somebody that can help point out like why they keep going to this situation, you
Right.
know?
Right. And that's key for people to understand, right? It's based on, I always tell people too, it's actually based on that brain dynamic, right?
Mm,
Because we've all been conditioned, we've all have learned behavior, but when somebody is traumatically impacted, that whole dynamic of the brain changes. uh, this whole beautiful frontal cortex that is our green light and kind of directs us, helps us go in the right direction, right? Decision making, impulse control,
Yeah,
that usually, is supposed to take over and help us. But when trauma happens, you often kick back in this backside of the brain.
yeah. The amygdala.
Yes.
Mm,
Um, and it's always on a survival mode, or
hmm.
you've just, some people have just been conditioned around this traumatic or what we would call toxic environment to be the
Mm,
norm for them. What
yep.
most people are seeing as, oh, this is so toxic. Why do they keep, going back to this relationship? Why do they keep doing the same thing over and over again? But for that person, that's the norm.
Hmm.
How do you break something that's the norm for you if that's all you know, right? And it can be difficult to understand.
Yeah.
It really can.
Yeah, and people have a really hard time understanding it unless they study it or unless they're in it and have lived it. I like because I think I'm sure you found yourself in situations before where you have to explain trauma to, say, a family member of somebody or whatever it is, right, to get them. And one of the ways I like to kind of try and get them to empathize a little bit is we've all watched a scary movie, right? Like a
Mhm.
scary film or something at night, right? Like, and it's dark out. Maybe it's, like there's a very creepy movie. You turn off the movie and then you're going to bed and you think everything is out to get you. You jump at your refrigerator makes a noise. You're afraid someone's standing out behind, like ready to jump out and get you, and you're going to bed, like almost kind of looking over your shoulder a little bit.
Right,
That's your amygdala activated. That's
right.
your flight or fight response
Hmm.
activated, and we know it's irrational, right? Like we do know, and that is how people with complex PTSD walk around sometimes, just daily,
Right.
right? So, like, even just think on that level, that is a very difficult way to live. That's a
Mhm.
very difficult way to take in the world. And even just thinking about that, I hope people could understand that sometimes decision making isn't going to be a strong
Right.
characteristic of somebody who walks around like that, or
Hmm.
being safe might not be necessarily the best way to that might not be something that they prioritize. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes these people won't leave their house, right? Which is very understandable. And yeah,
Right.
so this is something like that people have struggle with constantly, and it can affect all sorts of different domains in their life: relationships, work, school, you know what I mean? Like their how the way they look after themselves, health wise, all the rest of it. Like it's really, really tough for people.
Mm. Okay. I want to ask you a question, but I'm going to kind of go a different way this time because I find this quite interesting. Because I want you to, how would you help a family member? Okay. Help someone or understand someone better who is actually dealing with this complex trauma.
Mm,
Because often when people are dealing with trauma and decision making is off, can we just be honest? Judgment is off, oftentimes, because of, again, you're in the back of this brain. How do you help a family member, friend, understand that this person is not purposely doing this, right?
mm.
It's just how they've learned to operate, okay?
Yeah, it's very difficult because if it is, and I am, you're talking about, say, the family member or friend of somebody
Mhm.
who is going through, say, complex or is
Right.
experiencing complex trauma, right?
Mhm.
It's very difficult because these people are the ones that are probably affected by it the most, right? Because they love that person and they want them to be okay. And as you know, if you work in, like, I've also in a previous existence worked with families in counseling and couples in counseling. Oftentimes, the people we support the most are the ones we get, and the ones we love the most are the ones that we get so much angrier at, more angry at, and more frustrated with, and I've seen it where somebody goes back to that poor decision one too many times, and then a falling out happens,
Mhm.
right? And that's really tough. So it would be hard for me if somebody is angry at these people at a family member for making poor decisions. I understand that You want them to be okay, and they're putting themselves in these situations. I think that's a very valid
Right.
feeling to have. I think the best I can do is to explain what complex trauma is to
Right.
them, right? Their physiology, a person's, you brought up the prefrontal cortex, we brought up the amygdala, right? We brought
Mhm.
up that brain development. We talked about the repeated patterns of stress and behavior, repeated patterns of stress and you know, exposure to trauma that somebody might have over and over and over again growing up. That affects decision making, as you said, but it's like, how does that affect decision making? It completely rewires a person's brain. So their perception of danger, on the one hand, might be constant, right?
Mhm.
It might be totally constant. On the other hand, they also might not feel any kind of danger response for
Mhm.
something, or it's completely skewed.
Right.
This is a very cliche thing, but it's a cliche for a reason, right? Like,
Right.
there are people I've worked with that will go into a house party full of the worst kind of drugs
Mhm.
and perceive that as safe.
Mm.
And the very same time, at the very same time, will respond to genuine love and compassion from a family member, a partner, or whatever, a friend. They'll respond to that as threatening, right? It's like, it's almost kind of like that developmental piece gets so messed up because of these repeated patterns over time that their threat response is
Mhm.
naturally completely off. And we can't comprehend that, because that's right. Like, a person who hasn't gone through that cannot comprehend that,
Right.
right? But it's, think of it like your regular threat response, but it's
Mhm.
completely flipped.
Yeah.
Now, again, I would still leave the ball in the park of the people who have had to put up with this for a while, right? Like, and have had to deal with it. I think feelings are valid either way, but I think it's worth explaining it, you
Right.
know?
I did a show for the relaunch called
Mm,
"What Are You Intaking?" This is the name,
yep,
okay?
yep, yep.
Because often we don't understand how what we intake impacts us mentally. This whole beautiful brain of ours, how it helps structure this brain, our experiences, childhood, different, parts of our life, they go with us. And so, those people who have experienced childhood trauma, okay, and often they suppress it, but then it shows up. It's the one thing, I forget the doctor's name that wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, Bessel van der Kolk, right? Was that the Dutch
Yes,
guy? Yeah,
right,
yeah.
yeah, right. And then they push it away and go, "Oh, that happened years ago. I'm just going to leave it right there and just forget it." But then they're trying to navigate life with all of this suppressed emotion, all of this trauma in the body, and they can't quite understand what they're feeling and why they're feeling this way, why they get angry so quickly, why they're stressed, all of these things. And it's just based on how that experience impacted you. You said it so beautiful, watching scary movies, which I do not do, by the way,
Neither do I.
because, can you imagine if that's all you did was watch scary movies, or if you're living in a life that feels like a scary movie?
Hmm.
Right? You're constantly hyper vigilant. You're looking around, always expecting something to happen. And so it is so important that we teach people how to get the help needed around these things that they intake psychologically, because it does affect us physiologically as well. Okay. And talk about these things. So my next question to you, though, is why do you think two people can go through the same event but experience it differently? They respond differently.
There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I mean, it's because that is true. I mean, there's been plenty of, there's been, I mean, the really famous twin studies coming out of the Second World War that taught us a lot about trauma and epigenetics and what we inherit from our parents and different things like that, right? And I think various factors, there can be a whole bunch of different factors. I think, for example, trauma is never welcome
Mm,
in any situation,
right.
right? However, the ones that respond better to it, typically are the ones with some sort of very validating and loving support system around them.
Yes. Yes.
I've worked with people who have experienced sexual abuse, and it's a very hard, difficult thing to navigate for a whole bunch of different reasons. You can develop obsessions, there's detachment issues, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of self-hatred, suicidality, you know what I mean? Like and then not to mention like the relatively small percentage of people that can sometimes have the urge to repeat, right, those kind of behaviors. And it's a very destructive thing, right? That somebody goes that for the society, for everybody, that this happens, and it's horrific. It's interesting with the people I've worked with that have gone through this, the ones that have had the most success navigating it are the ones that had a support system that helped them around it.
Right.
Because sometimes families will hear, like, a kid, somehow a family finds out about sexual, because oftentimes, unfortunately, it's within the family. There's a caregiver, there's somebody in the family, right? And families will find out about this. And I hear it, unfortunately, way too much, where I don't know if it's shame, I don't know if it's embarrassment, I don't know if it's this kind of conflict averse thing or closeness within the family, but they'll try to kind of like make it go away, brush this under the rug. We're not bringing the police into it. We're not doing anything like, and sometimes it goes, unaccounted for. And that can be extremely damaging to the victim.
Right.
Extremely damaging to the victim, because this is an extremely complex, abusive thing that has happened to this individual. And now you're throwing in this piece of, well, nobody cares as well, right? And then that can be extremely damaging and just a further layer of complex trauma, right? And complexity that you have to navigate later on in life, or with and as a therapist, you have to kind of consider this as well. The people that have navigated very well are the ones where the parents or the caregivers or whoever it is steps in and goes, this isn't right, let's get the police, let's get the therapist, let's get the social services, let's get all these, let's get the help, right? And obviously there's going to be some scars there, but at least that individual knows that there's people looking out for them, that love them, and that are out. You know what I mean? So that's just a small example to answer your question of how can two people respond differently to something as horrific as a sexual abuse, right? Is like that. And I just wanted to outline exactly when some people say, well, the environment is better. That's an example of how an environment can be bad and very good, right? That I've seen it. There might also, there's, when you look at kind of psychosis and stuff like that, like people literally kind of becoming psychotic, there seems to be a genetic piece to that as well. I'm not a geneticist, I'm not a doctor, I probably can't speak too much on that, but that seems to play a role too, to a certain extent. But at least the type of the part of the world that I'm familiar with, support systems are extremely, extremely important.
Yes, I totally agree, because it sends a message to the person as well about themselves.
Yep.
Specifically, if the person is a child and it happens, it speaks to their self-worth, their sense of self. Nobody cares about me, I'm not worth it. All of those things. And those traumas happen in so many ways. Absent parents, we don't think about that. An absent father or mother, that's traumatic for a child because they know they have two parents. And then, of course, they grow up, unless somebody is supporting them through that and helping them understand that you did nothing to make this person walk away from your life. Okay, they grow up with this idea of, I'm not worth it. Why? What did I do? Why they didn't want to be a part of my life? And so it's about that support system, allowing them to feel safe enough to come to the people around them and even address this issue, talk about it. And feel like, okay, the people around them care enough to get them the help that they needed, because those messages are sent to the self in a way that's often negative. If you don't get that positive support, that positive validation around what happened to you, that is not okay that it happened.
Absolutely.
All right, so my next question is to you is, what role do you believe culture and upbringing plays in shaping our emotional responses?
I think huge.
Yeah.
I it's interesting, right? Because I grew up like I mean like I'm Irish. I grew up in Ireland. It's a li and lived in the US for quite a while.
Yeah.
I found it was very interesting. I think partly this was growing up, but also I think partly was just kind of experiencing a different culture and working in different cultures, even within the US. One of the big challenges I probably had to overcome myself as a therapist was being comfortable with talking about uncomfortable things, right? Like, and I think Irish people in particular, and I think it's shifting because there's a bit I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point today, but there's been a shifting perspective on mental health, let's say, in Irish culture over the last couple decades, right? Where it was very people were very suspicious of this like historically, really now, and it was often misused and it was really kind of suppressed, and we're still catching up
Right.
because of that suppression, um, even just kind of governing body wise, we really are. But to kind of answer the question, I grew up in a culture where you didn't really use the word love, right? You didn't really kind of use that, like, and that sounds really silly, like literally didn't really use the word love. You did love the people around you, of
Right.
course you did, but you never said it, right? And if you kind of had a problem, it was a little bit more kind of expected that you don't be a nuisance and you kind of brush it off and maybe you use humor, right? Like Irish, everyone I grew up around was funny, right? And that's good, right? But it's a case of sometimes that was used to mask issues, right? And
Right.
sometimes it's used to, so that's an example, right? Where I'm married now and I've been married for coming up actually 7 years this weekend, hilariously. But that's something I had to kind of navigate even in my own relationships too, where if I have a problem or I have an issue, I need to talk this out, right? Like I really need to talk this out. I can't let this fester because if it does, it's just going to build and build and build and build and build, and that leads to resentment, and that can lead to lashing out, and that can lead to anger and all the rest of these things. And that's entirely a cultural piece, right? And if you talk to people from the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, these countries that who are our next door neighbors, right? Like it's pretty similar there too. Um, so that was something I really noticed moving over to the States was while of course not everybody and every culture is like this. But I lived in New England for a few years. I did find people much more communicative about their feelings and what's upsetting them and why, like and I found that to be kind of after a while a bit of a relief. You know
Mm.
what I mean? That I kind, and it's something as I've moved back here and I've grown up, I really tried to kind of hone in on myself, you know what I mean? To kind of make sure I continue to do that. So that's a personal example, right? Of like, okay, that's a cultural piece I grew up with.
Right.
And my emotional response and other people's emotional response was very, um shaped by that,
Right.
and yeah, so like and suppressing those emotional responses, I mean, they don't go anywhere,
Mm-mm.
right? They don't go and they don't disappear. They stay in you. You
Yeah.
just forget about them for a while. And that can lead to all sorts of different issues down the line. It can lead to substance use, substance abuse. It can lead to bad decision making. We talked about that earlier, right? So
Mhm.
yeah,
It can
hope that
also
answers your
lead to,
question.
yeah, it can also lead to physiological issues. Can I be honest?
Absolutely.
Hypertension, these autoimmune disorders. Because when I usually tell people, it's the thing that you try to push down the most, it works the hardest to come up, right? And culture plays a big role in how we navigate our emotions as well as our sense of self, right? I am, of course, an African American. And while emotions wasn't something that was talked about a lot in my household, can I just be
Right.
honest? I think I was in my late 20s when my mother finally said to me, I love you. And it was because I said it to her. And she had
Mm,
to get comfortable with me saying it, like, I love you, mommy, before I walk out the house, right? And I knew my mother loved me. But it wasn't something that we focused on growing up, these emotions. And for a long time, it took me some time to understand my emotions, how to communicate that. Because nobody was sitting down saying, okay, tell me how you feel, right? What's going on with you today? But culture plays a big role in our emotional state, in our overall sense of self, or how we view ourselves. Because again, it's the environment that you grow up in. And all of the messages that are coming to you around who you are, how you should respond, act, feel, all of those things. And so learning how to navigate that is also key.
Absolutely. Even the therapists had to figure this out, huh? There we
Yes,
go.
exactly. 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 I think I said it before, even as a therapist, with my own stuff, my ideal of going to therapy, that was the last thing on my mind.
Same.
Literally, it was the last thing on my mind. Until one day I'm sitting in a psychology class and I'm listening to all this stuff and I'm like, oh my God, maybe I should go to therapy.
Those first psychology classes are eye-opening. Huh?
Exactly.
Like, this isn't a book. I just thought this is how the world was, right? Yeah. How I was. Yeah. Interesting.
Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. And Shane, when I come back, we want to talk about the differences between Ireland and the U.S. and how mental health is navigated. We'll be right back. If you are a professional or someone with a story and would like to be a guest on the show, go to our website, intaketalkshow.com, and complete the form to be a guest. Perhaps you are someone with a question or comment that you would like addressed on the show. Again, go to our website, intaketalkshow.com, and complete the contact form. I hope to see you soon. And remember to continue to talk about mental health and how to make yours a priority.
Did you enjoy this conversation? We'd love to hear from you. Join us next week as we continue our conversation with Shane on trauma and how we respond to it. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. And please like and subscribe our Facebook and YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.